Hello, I'm your host, Sarah Williams. Welcome to Tough Girl Extra, which is when we go back and speak with previous tough girls and learn what they've been up to since we last spoke. Today, I'm delighted we're going to be speaking to Felicity Aston, who in 2012 became the first woman to ski alone across Antarctica. It was a journey of 1,744 kilometres that took 59 days to complete, which gave her a place in the Book of Guinness World Records. Felicity has gone on to organise and lead numerous expeditions to remote places around the world, but particularly to the polar regions. It's amazing that we are back speaking with Felicity Aston, who is an explorer, an author and a speaker. And I was just having a look back, and me and Felicity were talking about this before, to say when was the last time we spoke? And the great thing about Skype is it pops up and tells you that we last spoke on the 10th of November 2015, and the first episode aired on the 10th of December 2015. So a long time has passed since we last caught up with Felicity. So Felicity, fantastic to get you back on Tough Girl Extra. I'd love for you just to quickly, very briefly tell everybody more about you before we catch up with what you've been up to.
Yeah, well, I'm Felicity Aston, and I spend a lot of time putting together expeditions to go to very cold places, usually Antarctica, but in the last few years I've been focused north, so going to the Arctic. Most recently, the women's Euro-Arabian North Pole expedition.
Oh my God, amazing. Why is it the Arctic? What do you love about the Arctic?
Well, I was really fascinated. I mean, as we were saying just before, I spent a summer on a Russian icebreaker. It's the most powerful icebreaker in the world. It's a nuclear powered, big Russian behemoth, and it sort of bashes its way all the way to the North Pole and back to and from Murmansk every year. And so I spent 2 months on this ship going backwards and forwards to the North Pole through the sea ice 4 times in 2 months. And just seeing the sea ice and seeing this environment. And I'd been to the Arctic before, various parts of the Arctic, but, that high latitude sea ice was a whole, new terrain to explore. And I thought, I really want to put skis on this. I really want to, put together an expedition. And there'd been an expedition in the back of my mind for a while, and it just sort of gave me the push to actually do something about it. And and I wasn't disappointed, because it's just a whole new set of challenges. The main being that this isn't solid ground that you're going to. It's a shifting platform of ice, and so there's a whole new set of rules about traveling. You can't just say, right, we're going to travel from point A to point B, and we're going to travel this far, and we're going to have a camp here and a camp there, or we're going to have because everything's moving. All the goalposts are moving all of the time, and you don't know what direction they're moving in. You don't know how fast they're going to be moving until you're actually there. And so, for me, that was really interesting to have that new dimension to an expedition like this.
It must have been fantastic being on this nuclear-powered icebreaker at the North Pole, but having sort of 2 months to think about different challenges and adventure. What were you actually doing on the icebreaker? Was that scientific or was that exploration? What was happening there?
Well, I was working, so it's this is a working icebreaker, but during the summer season, the crew kind of moved down a level and free up their cabins for paying guests, so paying tourists. So I was there looking after the guests. So I was doing a bit of speaking, but also driving the small boats, the Zodiac boats, so that we could visit Franz Josef Land on the way through, and then sort of looking after the guests when they got off the ship onto the ice at the North Pole. So it was a job effectively, but a pretty incredible experience to have at the same time.
Oh my God, that sounds incredible. Definitely not like some of the jobs that I've been doing recently. but tell me more about the Women Euro-Arabian North Pole expedition and how the idea formed.
Yeah, well, sort of alongside this curiosity about the North Pole, and it's a fascinating environment in the fact that it's also disappearing and changing so fast. It's arguable that maybe in another 5 years' time, it won't be possible to do ski expeditions around the North Pole anymore. And coupled with that, there's this disbelief, as I'm watching world news, and I don't understand why there seems to be such a disconnect between cultures in the Middle East and cultures in the rest of Europe, and particularly with the women in those two cultural regions. There doesn't seem to be much sort of support or understanding or connection. It just seems that we're in two different worlds, and I was curious about that. I wanted to understand more. I wanted to understand whether there is support that we can give culturally, and how we can do that. And I know from previous experiences that expeditions are a great way of getting to know people very well very quickly, because everything gets stripped away, and you're just left with people that are feeling quite vulnerable. They're under pressure, they're a long way from home, and so you get to know who they are. And I thought, well, maybe this is a great way to sort of provide some insight into that cultural relationship or lack of cultural relationship. So that's why I focused on putting together a team from the Middle East and from across Europe, and hoping to provide some insight into this lack of relationship that there seems to be.
Absolutely. To be fair, it's just absolutely fascinating. What an incredible idea. Love it. And obviously can't wait to hear more about it. But I think what I always find really interesting is when people have these ideas and that, and everyone, it's so easy to have an idea, but actually to turn that into a reality is a whole different kettle of fish. So what was almost the first step that you took? How did you go about making this happen?
Yeah, well, my first step was to find a team and to see what kind of reaction I would get. I mean, particularly, I had no experience in the Middle East, so I didn't know what kind of reaction there would be. I didn't really know what kind of cultural sensitivity I needed in going out there and trying to find this team. So I decided to sort of fall back on a pattern that I'd used with the Commonwealth expedition back in 2009, which found women from different Commonwealth countries to go to the South Pole. So I just put up on the website, on my personal website, I've got this idea. Is there anyone out there who's interested on coming on this expedition? And I had nearly 1,000 responses. So it was almost too much for me to deal with on my own, because I read through every single response that I got and slowly started narrowing down that shortlist. And I got down to about, maybe 40 quite quickly, but then narrowing that 40 down to just 12 to make up a team. And even, that was a sizable team. So I was kind of, in two minds about whether that was too large or not to handle. But I went with 12 in the end. And it was really tough because there was some amazing people that got in touch, some people that I would have loved to have got to know better, that would have been a huge asset to the expedition. But, the simple numbers are that you can only ask 12. So, so that's how I got my team. And it was a bit nerve wracking because I didn't have the funding this time to go and meet anybody. So the first time that I met everybody was when I'd already got a formed team, and we met together for a training expedition in Iceland back in September of 2016. And I didn't know what kind of group I was going to be ending up with. But it all turned out very well. I was really happy with the group and the way everyone got along. So that was perfect.
Oh, what an incredible process to go through. And it must have been overwhelming receiving these thousands of women applying. I mean, when it comes to expeditions, teamwork, especially in the Arctic, is incredibly important. What were you specifically looking for? Was it that their background? Were you looking for experience? Was it age? Was it more like proof that they'd done challenges before and had shown like mental resilience, or was it just a gut feeling, which I know is very difficult to describe?
Yeah, it was almost the exact opposite of all of that, actually. I mean, I think the core thing was I was looking trying to work out what their motivation was, trying to suss out their motivation and whether, I felt that was a strong enough motivation to see them through. So some sort of vague notion of notoriety in your home country, or it just being the latest in a string of fitness challenges, for example, that wasn't going to be a strong enough motivation to see them, not through the expedition, but through what I knew would be, months and months, possibly years of trying to pull the thing together. What makes you make that final sponsorship inquiry when you've already been rejected by dozens? What makes you go for that training run when you're really tired and no one's going to know, because we're all training separately. So trying to work out what people's motivation was and whether they would have the strength of motivation and determination to do it. But then, in terms of experience, I wanted a real mix of experience. I wanted, some people with some experience, because I felt I would need that in the group, but also people who perhaps had never done anything like this before. I also wanted a real mix of ages. I wanted a real mix of backgrounds, because part of my motivation for putting this expedition together was to hammer home this point that I'm always banging on about, which is, that anybody can go out and do this. They just need to want to do it enough. That's the one thing I can't give people. I can give them the skills, the training, but I can't give them the motivation. They have to bring that themselves, the want to do it. So we had a range in age from 26 to almost 50. We had scientists, we had mothers, we had finance officers, we had journalists, we had all sorts of different lifestyles represented within that team. And that was really important to me. And I think I was also looking for something maybe that I recognised, when people were talking to me. When people said something, I thought, gosh, yeah, I feel like that too. That for me was a good sign. And a good mix of characters. You can't have 12 highly organised, detailed people. You can't have 12 jokers. You can't have, 12 dreamers. You have to have a real mix of characters. So I was trying to get that balance right too.
Oh, absolutely. So you did the sort of the paper application, and then did you do Skype interviews with all of the women?
Yes, yeah. So the team was put together really on the strength of Skype interviews, which it worked quite well. I mean, I don't get it right all of the time, and with this team, in hindsight, perhaps there were decisions I could have made differently. But, mostly, I mean, in that first training expedition, we had one team member who, it was her first experience of getting up on a glacier, sleeping in a tent, putting on a pair of skis. And our first night on the glacier, after we'd done sort of about a week of training at lower altitudes, and then we'd gone up onto the glacier. And, she just said to me, Felicity, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, and I really don't want to do it. And I really respected her for that, because this isn't for everybody. Being cold and stressed in a tent is not everyone's cup of tea. And I was just impressed by the fact that she was very open about her reason. She didn't try and say, oh, I've got an injury, or oh, this, or and make up some excuse. It was, just this isn't for me. And I thought, that's really hard to turn around and say that when you've got the expectation of friends and family back home, and you're surrounded by a team. But she was really honest about it, and she knew her own mind. And that was fine as far as I was concerned. It was, but obviously I don't get it right all the time.
Yeah, I mean, take us back to September 2016 when the team comes together for the first time. Getting to meet one another. I mean, I can almost just imagine the excitement and the nerves that this. Oh my goodness, this is actually happening. What was it like being there?
Yeah, it was a real high, and everyone did get on very well. And that's easy sort of in this honeymoon period when there is all this excitement and expectation. I guess it's the months that follow that is the real teller. But, although everyone was very excited, they were realistic as well. And I think that's what impressed me, is that they were waiting for the hard times to come, and still sort of prepared to work. So that's what really impressed me about it. And just the optimism and the openness of everybody, because there was a sort of cultural experiment side to the project, and that can be quite difficult to handle, and yet everyone was really open right from the outset, and that I was really thankful for that, because that was a huge part of the project, and it wouldn't work if people weren't willing to talk about their lives in their own countries and things like that. So, it was wonderful to be part of that.
I was going to say, I mean, coming from the UK, I feel as though, I mean, we're in the, we sometimes put our heating on in May, which is absolutely ridiculous. And I absolutely hate the cold. But I'm just imagining that the women coming over, from sort of Saudi Arabia, from Oman, who've been used to this incredible heat, and may never have really sort of had to handle the cold, or the first time on a glacier. What was that like for them, experiencing these sort of extreme temperatures in the other direction?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them were coming from plus 40, and it wasn't terribly cold in the glacier in Iceland, but when we actually hit the sea ice in the Arctic, I mean, our first day it was minus 38 degrees centigrade, and a lot of them are more used to plus 38 degrees centigrade. So, I mean, I've always in the past said, well, when you're going into those extremes of temperature, everybody is uncomfortable. It doesn't matter if you've grown up in central London or in central Jeddah. You're still going to be feeling uncomfortable in the extreme cold, and it's a whole new set of skills that everybody has to learn, and that's why I think polar expeditions are particularly suited to this kind of cultural endeavor, because everybody is put on the same level. Everyone will find that uncomfortable. I mean, we had Misbah from Manchester, and she found the glacier experience just as incredible as Lamis from Kuwait. So that side of things I think was quite even across. But I've just on the basis of our experience on this expedition, when we finally got up to the Arctic sea ice, on the first day we had Mariam from Saudi, who got a cold injury. She got frostbite in one of her hands, and that for me is a terrible thing to have happened. And, some people might say, oh, well, you have to expect it. But I think, if you're well trained, if you're well prepared, frostbite is not a natural consequence of going to these regions. And, Mariam was well trained. She was well prepared. We had all focused just before we went out there on, the first day we're most at risk. We have to be really careful. And all of that first day, we spent a lot of time and energy and trouble, checking each other, checking ourselves, always saying, can you feel your fingers? Can you feel your toes? Are you okay? And yet, despite all of that, at the end of that first day, we had a team member end up with frostbite that was serious enough that, she had to leave the expedition. And so I've spent a lot of time reflecting on, oh my goodness, how has this happened? And, this happened on a previous expedition, the South Pole expedition I mentioned previously with the Commonwealth expedition team. First day, my team member from Jamaica got frostbite and couldn't continue. So, that for me as a leader of a team is of deep concern. What am I doing wrong? What is, how can we prevent this happening? What could we have done differently? And I do wonder whether, this coming from extremes of temperature, maybe this is playing a role that I haven't appreciated before. Mariam came from Saudi when it was in the plus 30s, and she had a week, 10 days in Longyearbyen, in Svalbard, so in temperatures of down to maybe minus 20 before going to the sea ice. But maybe she needed more acclimatization, or maybe this is a factor of inexperience that I haven't truly appreciated until now. If you don't know what it feels like to have really cold hands, perhaps you can't tell me, can you feel the ends of your fingers? If you don't have the experience of knowing what it feels like to go numb. perhaps you can't tell me, are your fingers cold? Are your toes cold? So, yeah, it's given me a lot of food for thought in the aftermath of this expedition, as to, maybe I need to change the way that I do things.
Absolutely. No, it's really interesting, and it's great to be able to look back and reflect. And this is what doing these challenges is all about, to be on this journey of learning. Tell us more about the journey and the expedition and what was involved in it.
Yeah, so to get up onto the sea ice around the North Pole, it's a pretty incredible journey in itself. So first of all, you go to Svalbard, which is a cluster of islands about halfway between the top of Norway and the North Pole. And we were there in the town there called Longyearbyen, just preparing and waiting for our flight, which goes from Longyearbyen and flies you right up onto the Arctic sea ice and lands on the sea ice. So there's this incredible camp called Barneo that's opened every year, and it's basically a runway and a cluster of tents. That's it, and it's an incredible logistic kind of feat to set up this camp every year. And so we land on this ice runway, and then immediately are transferred to 2 helicopters, and the helicopters fly you up to the start point of the expedition. And we started about 80 kilometers away from the pole. And you land on the sea ice, and the sea ice feels like solid land. It feels like you're on hard ground. But when you look at your GPS, you can see that you're constantly moving, sometimes at speeds of sort of half a kilometre an hour, something like that. And you don't know what direction you're going to be moving in. And you just really hope that it's going to move you sideways, or even towards the pole. That would be nice, but anything but backwards, because then you get onto this sort of conveyor belt effect. So that's the first challenge, is the fact that the platform that you're standing on is constantly moving, but then you're surrounded by clues that you're not on solid ground. So the ice sometimes pushes together, and it sort of slides up over each other and creates rubble that sits on the surface, and they sort of form these ridges that you call pressure ridges, and you're crossing them all the time. Usually they're pretty small, but sometimes they can be really huge. So clambering over these pressure ridges with your skis, with your sledges that contain everything you need, that's a bit of a challenge. And then in other places, the ice pulls apart, so you're left with these what's called leads, like cracks in the ice. And we came across some that were pretty much open, so you could see open water between, and we saw one move, which was pretty frightening. But usually they've frozen over, so they freeze quite quickly, and so they've frozen with a thin layer of ice, but it's still thick enough for you to cross. But of course, that's judgment all the time. Is this ice thick enough, not just for one person to cross, but for a team of 11 to cross? So that was another challenge. And then finally, last year, they spotted a polar bear right near the North Pole. So in years past, the general rule has been that polar bears don't go that far north, because they prefer to hang around the ice edge where there's a food source. But because of the changes in the Arctic, there's now seals venturing much further north. So the polar bears follow their food source. So they're venturing a lot further north. And last year, some teams came across a bear within the last degree, so north of 89 degrees. So we had to be prepared for polar bears as well. Even though it was unlikely, we had to be prepared for that. So, and then there's just the cold. The cold's pretty relentless. I mean, we were very lucky with the temperatures. After that first day where it was pretty brutal, it then was sort of hovering around -20 for most of the time. But, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of thought just to keep yourself prepared against the cold all the time.
Oh, absolutely. I think what's really interesting is you had, you started with this idea, and then you reached out to these, and you got 1,000 replies. You narrowed it down to 40, and then narrowed it down even further to this team of 12. You met again in September 2016, and then you had your departure date in April 2018. So during that time period, what was going on then in terms of like the planning, the fitness, the preparation? Was it being divided out amongst the team? Was it you doing a lot of the heavy lifting, or how did that work?
Yeah, so obviously our personal fitness, we were training individually. We were also raising the funds, which in a huge respect is, the hardest part of any of these expeditions is just putting together the funds to pay for it. So we were looking for sponsorship as a team, but also sponsorship as individuals, and it sort of worked out half and half. So that's a lot of time and effort. We also met up for 2 further training expeditions. So we met up in September 2016 in Iceland. Then we met up again in February of 2017 in Oman. And a lot of people said, well, that's bonkers going for a training expedition for a polar expedition in a desert. But actually it worked really well because the desert, that sort of sand dune desert environment, you can't map that because the dunes are moving and it's just not mapped. So when you're navigating across that kind of landscape, you have to make route finding decisions on the spot. You can't make them in advance, and you don't necessarily know exactly how far you're going to go, or all those kind of factors. So it was great training from that respect, and from the endurance and stamina, and also building up the team relationships. That can happen in cold or in hot. It doesn't really matter. So and it also gave us the sort of cultural backdrop, which was lovely. So I'm really pleased that we did that. And then we met up again in February of 2018, earlier this year, back in Iceland again for another training expedition here. So we had those 3 training expeditions, and in between it was a matter of just trying to keep the communication as fluid as possible. So I would send regular updates round to the whole team. We had sort of communication through things like a Facebook group and WhatsApp, and people were pretty good at keeping in communication through those means. So you felt like you knew people really well, even though we'd only met each other on 3 occasions. So that worked well.
How much did the expedition cost?
A lot. So the flight from Longyearbyen up to the runway, and then the helicopter to drop you off, then the search and rescue cover while you're out there, and then the helicopter back to Borneo, and then the flight back to Longyearbyen. Just that bit costs €30,000 per person. That's the sort of standard cost. It all gets a little bit complicated because there are various different logistics, different size of teams, so it varies. But you can do the math. So that was the basic core cost.
And how did you find getting sponsorship? Did you find it easier because you were an all-female team and coming from this Europe and Arabic? Is that the right word? Arabian.
No, it's always tough to find sponsorship, and it doesn't matter how much credibility you have, how many expeditions you have under your belt. It's always tough, and it's never a good time. I hear so often people say, oh, but the economics right now isn't great. The economy's, it's not a good time. It's never been a good time. I mean, I was looking for sponsorship back in 2007, 2008 when we had the massive crash. So, it is hard, and it never works the same way twice for me. It's always approaching companies and trying to work out what will be of most interest to them in that time period, because it's likely not to be the same if you went back, a few years later. I think it helps if you have a good story. If you look at what you're trying to do and the team you're trying to do it with, if there isn't a story there, or if it's a story that we've heard a lot of times before, I think you're less likely to succeed. And what I discovered with this team was that size was a huge factor. 12, I think, was too big for a lot of sponsors. Because particularly things like kit sponsors, because that's a lot of product that they're then having to give you. So it just made me extra appreciative of those companies that did make the leap and did have the belief in us. And And now the important thing is that we work really hard, both before, during, and now after the expedition, to make sure that they get a return on their investment in whatever format they want that. So for some companies, it's about going in and inspiring their employees. For others, it's about PR and the association between the company and the expedition. For others, it's about feedback on their product. So now is a lot of when a lot of that work happens.
Talking about the money side of thing and the sponsorship side of thing is so important, because it's so easy to look at challenges and expeditions and think, oh, well, it's okay, Felicity. It's okay for Felicity. She's got all of these connections. She's got all this experience. It must be easy for her to raise those, to raise those funds. And actually, these are big numbers like you're talking about. And it's a challenging side of expeditions that generally doesn't really get talked about. It's something that I've been wanting to talk more about on the podcast is the money side of things. In terms of physical training for you, how do you go about doing it? Do you always keep yourself at a certain level of fitness, or when you come back from exploring and expeditions, are you like, oh, okay, I might just relax for a few months? How do you manage it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a fitness binger. I don't do fitness for its own sake. It's a means to an end, and I do it because I have to. But by doing it, I keep fit through doing it. Having said that, the last couple of years, it's been different types of expeditions that I've been doing, and they haven't been quite so good at keeping me expedition ready, I guess. But yeah, it's something that you just have to keep a general state of fitness. And I think, as long as, you just have to keep yourself in a general state of fitness. And, a lot of these expeditions, it's more about sort of your strength and your stamina rather than your maybe athletic fitness. I mean, on this expedition, for example, one of the team members who on paper should have been physically the fittest, got out to the ice and really struggled physically. And I think it's because particularly polar expeditions, a lot of it is to do with where your head's at first, is to do with, the mental side of it rather than the physical side of it. But secondly, that sort of strength and stamina doesn't necessarily always come hand in hand with like cardiovascular fitness, I suppose. But I think it has to come most importantly with the mental fitness, the mental side of things. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. And this expedition really sort of highlighted that it's the muscle in your head that is perhaps most important rather than your general fitness.
Let's talk about that mental fitness, because does it ever get to a point, because you've got so much experience now, living over in Iceland and spending time over in Antarctica, has your mindset sort of changed? Because obviously you will have grown and developed a certain amount of confidence by spending time on the ice and doing these explorations. Has that changed how you mentally prepare, or does it make you even more focused to make sure that you do have the right mindset? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I'm really wary of becoming too complacent, and I'm also wary of trying to remember what it's like not to know. So this was a great exercise for me because I wasn't familiar with high latitude sea ice. I wasn't familiar with this particular terrain. And so in many ways, there's a picture I love that was taken of the team as we were traveling in the helicopter to our start point, and the look on everyone's faces, you can really see there's a lot of trepidation there. There's, a lot of anxiety, and everybody for their own reasons. Some people worrying, oh my goodness, am I up to this? Others worrying about, oh, am I going to let the team down? Others worrying about, did I remember to pack this or did I remember to pack that? Have I got enough layers? Have I got the right kit? And I'm not immune to that. So, sitting there, my anxiety was, okay, I'm the one that's told everybody on this helicopter that they can do this. So I carry that responsibility. They have confidence in me, and I need to be worthy of that. And so, it was a good reminder for me about what it feels like to be going into something where there's lots of unknowns, where you're not familiar with what it's going to feel like, what it's going to look like, how you're going to react. But yeah, all these experiences over the years, it's just taught me that, the mental side of things is really key, and you have to prepare that. A lot of people do the mental preparation as a bit of an afterthought, or it's, a kind of fluffy session that you do around the edges. And yet, I really feel that it should be at the center of your preparation and what you're doing. And so I spent a lot of time with this team, just trying to talk to them about what their expectations are, firstly, because, I think a lot of people go out on expedition perhaps thinking that, everybody on the team is going to be their best friend, that, everything is going to go really smoothly, and, they're going to feel great. And, and so it's, laying out, a bit of an antidote to that, saying, you are not going to have a lot of sleep. You are going to feel cold all the time. This training is not about training you so that you won't feel cold. It's, training you so that you can feel a lesser degree of cold so that it doesn't get dangerous. And you're not going to like everybody on your team all of the time. There are going to be times when, you feel like everyone's out to get you and you're sick of the sight of everybody. And I think, having that expectation means that when that happens, if there is a day when you wake up thinking, oh God, I really don't want to be here, and I feel really cold, and I haven't had any sleep, and I hate everybody, that you don't go into this spiral of thinking, oh, that means I'm a failure. That means I've done something wrong. That means that this isn't going right. That means this is a disaster. No, that absolutely isn't a disaster. That's just the way expeditions are sometimes. And you need to, find a way to get back to a positive way of thinking and to get through it. And so I think if you lay out that more realistic expectation for people, when it happens, they're not thinking, oh, I'm a failure. They're thinking, oh, this is what Felicity was talking about. I do feel cold and I feel annoyed and I just want to go home. And that doesn't mean that I'm a failure. It just means that I'm having part of the expedition experience. So they're expecting to have those difficult moments. And I think that makes a huge difference. That you don't have, a team that feels like they're having a disastrous experience. Instead they realize that, this is what expeditions are all about, and it's about carrying on regardless. That's what makes the difference.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's so important that people are realistic about it. Like, you're not always having a good day. It's not all sunshine and rainbows and fabulous. That there are really tough times. As you brought this expedition together, absolutely incredible team that you've formed, you've trained together for almost over 2 years. When you were out on the ice, what is your leadership style like? I mean, how does it work being part of an all-female team? Does that change how you lead, or do you adapt your leadership depending on the situation?
Yeah, I mean, I try to be really clear that, I was the expedition leader, but I wasn't a guide. And, no one on that team was a guide. And I think it makes a difference because, then when I'm out on the ice, as a leader, I'm the one there with perhaps more experience than anybody else, although I had never travelled in that particular sort of environment before. So ultimately, the decisions and the safety of the team, that responsibility is mine. But what it means is that, I try and train everybody to give them the confidence so that, they can give me their opinion, and it will be opinions worth listening to about what we should do next. So we make those decisions as a team. I try and make sure that everybody feels ownership of this experience and feel that they have a say, so that they have done it. And I think the reward then is that when you do reach your goal, when we did reach the North Pole, everybody can reflect on that experience and really feel that they did it, themselves. They weren't, just led, to the North Pole with someone else making the decision on what route we take, where we cross the pressure ridges, when we camp. Everybody had a say in that. And that's really important to me, because I enjoy it more if I am achieving a goal that I've achieved myself, rather than, so I want that personal investment in the project. And 2 years to work towards a project is too long, I think, to be without that sense of satisfaction at the end. It was really, when I get the biggest kick as a leader is when we make that switch from me saying, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this, to them telling themselves, oh, I can do this, And so there were days on the expedition where, I really didn't do much of the decision making in terms of what route we were taking, how we were crossing the pressure ridges, how we were crossing the leads. The team were navigating and making those decisions. We took it in turns, to be at the front of the group making those decisions. That for me was brilliant, because I felt like, okay, that's great. You've put together a team and given them the skills and the training to be able to be out here having this adventure on their own terms. And that was really important to me.
One of the aims of creating this expedition was to address these common preconceptions between women in Western and Arabic cultures, and to hopefully provide some sort of insight that could make a difference in the future. What have you learned from that expedition?
Well, one of the most striking things from getting to know my Arabian teammates was that there is a huge sense of optimism about the role of women in their society. And that was kind of a real surprise to me, and also really made a contrast to when I'm talking to, women across Europe. There doesn't seem to be that sense of optimism. There seems to be the exact opposite, that there's a sense of fatigue, of frustration, that we are still facing issues such as, the gender pay gap, things like that. I sort of sense, and I feel it myself, it's like, oh my goodness, are we still having this conversation? Why are we still needing to do all this work, to get true equality? And, why are we still being told that, oh no, everything is equal now, when, clearly it isn't. And, experiences I've had, myself personally, it's just really frustrating that we're still having to have these conversations. And, talking to the women from the Middle East, there doesn't seem to be that feeling, that sense. Instead, there is huge optimism. They feel like they are riding a wave, and that, things are going really well and going in the right direction. And so I found that very interesting, first of all. And then the second insight for me personally, I mean, the thing is about the expedition is that, sharing what we've learned, now's the time that we're doing that. So we're hoping to do that. Firstly, there's a documentary being made about the expedition that we hope will show some of the things that we've seen. And also, the women are now, or every team member is going out and talking to schools, to companies, to groups and organisations, sometimes to governments, and sharing what they've learned. And then finally, we're writing about it as well. So, writing in magazines and things like that, and hopefully eventually we'll put it together into something more longer format. But, the other thing personally for me that I found really interesting was, talking about sort of the freedoms that you have within your society. And for me, perhaps the biggest culture difference was between me and Misbah from Manchester. So was the team member from my very own country. And when she talked about the limitations that she felt were placed upon her in her own life, they were things I didn't recognise. And, I found that endlessly fascinating, that, this was someone from my own country, and yet there seemed to be such cultural differences between us. And it really opened my eyes. And, I had fascinating conversations with Misbah.
when you look back over the expedition, and you've obviously talked about the frostbite and the challenge of that, but what do you think was the biggest challenge that you had to face and that you've learned from?
For me personally, the biggest challenge is always the people management, if you like. My role of sort of giving everyone confidence and yet sort of keeping them safe, and finding that fine line between sort of encouraging people, being a leader, but then also being the enabler, if you like. And it's difficult. It's, when do you lay down the law and when do you ease up a bit and let people make their own decisions? And I think, whatever type of group you're leading, that's always a difficult tightrope to walk. And so with this expedition, it was, as difficult as any other to try and get that balance right. But it's also a pleasure as well. That sounds really negative, doesn't it? But it's also a pleasure to, get to know people and, to put these groups together and then to see that group working really well. That's the reward at the end of it. But obviously for me, the biggest challenge was that I did have someone that got an injury on the expedition. And for me, as the person who's put that expedition together, that's the big learning point that I've taken away, the big thing that I'm reflecting on in terms of, why did that happen and how could I have prevented that happen? So that, if I ever do an expedition like this again, hopefully I can do it better.
Where can people find out more information about the Euro-Arabian North Pole expedition?
We have a website, EuroArabianExpedition.com, but you can also just search for me, Felicity Aston, and it will come up. And we've still got up the sort of log from the expedition, as well as information about the training expeditions that we did, and little intro videos from all the teams that you can learn a bit about who they are and where they've come from, and why they're part of the expedition. And there's some good stuff on there, so please do go check it out.
Oh, fantastic. Massive congratulations, for putting the team together and for, completing the expedition. Incredible achievement. What's going to be next for you? Have you got any plans in the pipeline, or are you taking a bit of time off at the moment?
Well, I want to make sure that I finish this project first, because getting to the pole is only the first bit. There's still plenty of work to do now that we've come back. So that will probably take me to the end of the year to get all that finished. But yeah, I'm already starting to think about the next trip. And so I have a few ideas and a few plans that I'm tentatively working on for next year. It probably won't be such a large expedition, the next one, because it does take such as you sort of alluded to earlier, I think sometimes the general perspective is that you sort of choose an expedition and out of a catalogue and there you go, it happens. But it's 2 years of your life to put these things together, so you have to choose quite carefully what project you're going to invest your time and energy in. So probably not something of that scale. I'll try and do a few small ones, just me maybe, and then see where we are. And
obviously there's the documentary coming out. Do you know the date of when the documentary is going to go live?
No, it will be sometime sometime next year. So that will be very exciting, but we will certainly be shouting about it on Twitter and Facebook and things like that when it happens. So if you're connected to us in some way on the social media, you'll definitely hear about it when it's released.
Fantastic. Now, I know you have written 3 great books. You've got Call of the White, which you taught, Taking the World to the South Pole, which you wrote in 2011. You've also got Alone in Antarctica, which we talked about on the Tough Girl podcast when we last spoke, which was written in 2013, and then Chasing Winter, A Journey to the Pole of Coal, which was released in 2014. Are you planning another book about this expedition?
Yes, and what I'm really hoping is that it won't just be me writing about it, that we can put together a book that shares the perspective from lots of different team members. So that's quite a complicated editing job to put that together, but everyone's busy writing at the moment, and I think we're going to take a look at the material that we get at the end of that and see if we can put something together that's a bit unique, because there are a lot of expedition accounts out there, and I don't really have any interest in just putting together another one about, we ate 300 grams of porridge today and I got a blister, that kind of thing. So it has to be something that puts together a different take on that expedition experience. So we'll look at the material that we get, but what I'm hoping is that it will be something that retells our story from different perspectives, particularly from a Middle Eastern perspective and a European perspective, and different team members within that group, because I think that will be really interesting, and I don't think that's something that we've seen before in sort of polar literature. So it would be exciting to put that together if we can.
Cool. So I want to get 2 pieces of advice from you. And the first one is about women applying for challenges like this, because I know there'll be women out there who think, I could never do that, and they'll just push it from their mind. But probably those women who are thinking those thoughts would probably learn the most from putting themselves in those situations. So what advice and tips do you have for women who maybe don't feel as confident about putting their name forward, stepping into the ring, wanting to take on an expedition like that? What advice would you have?
Yeah, I think, it's a tough one. I mean, my first instinct would say, go with your first instinct. If it's something that's attracted your attention, just put in an application. And once you've done it, then there's that sort of pressure of, oh God, I've started on this now, I've got to see it through. And, sometimes it's a bit like, if you announce to your friends and family that you're going to run a marathon, you're more likely to actually do it, because there's that kind of, I don't know, I guess social humiliation if you don't. So you sort of have that pressure. So maybe that would work, just put in the application, and, then you feel that you need to see it through. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? But I don't know how to, if you, I'm struggling.
Yeah, it's almost difficult to try and encourage people to take the first step, because I think that's just the hardest part, because generally once you've taken the first step, you get into this momentum and things just start happening, and suddenly you're training and you're going you're going on training expeditions, and then suddenly you've got flights booked, and then before you know it, you're on countdown, and then you're over there, and then you've started.
Well, I mean, there is one thing I've noticed that I will say is that, there are so many people that talk to me and say, I really want to do X, Y, or Z, whatever it is, but, it's not a right time right now because, I want to start a family, or because I've just changed jobs, or because, there are an infinite number of reasons, and genuine reasons, why this isn't a great time. Financial stresses, work stresses, family stresses, lots of really good reasons. But, the thing that I've come to learn is that there is never a good time. There is never a good time. And, what happens is that you just keep putting it off, and then years and years and years go by and you're still putting it off. So, although it's very tempting to think, I want to wait until, I've got this, or I've got that, or I've got this in place, or, I want to wait until all these pieces of the puzzle come together. I think the hard truth is that those pieces never do come together. There has never been an expedition I've put together that has been in a perfect scenario, either personally or, economically or anything. But, if I'd waited, then I'd probably still be sitting here with all these ideas and not having done any of them. So, you do have to start. And so although it's hard, and although it's, there are lots of really good reasons why now's not a great time, now is probably the perfect time. And, you have to just make that first step. Yeah.
Nice little segue now is, what are you putting off?
Yeah, what am I putting off? Well, there's been a book that I've been meaning to write for literally 10 years now. And it's still sort of half written, and Yeah, so now the challenge is, okay, so you've got a book that you should have written 10 years ago. So what is the reason why you're going to write it now? That's what the publisher wants to know. Why now? So I have to come up with a whole new reason for writing it now. So yeah, that's what I'm writing off that's what I'm putting off is the is sitting down writing. And that's a whole different challenge, is finding the time to do that.
Would you like to share what the book is about, or is that embargoed?
That's embargoed in case it never happens.
Do you want to have accountability? Share it now on the Tough Girl podcast, because then whenever members of the Tough Girl tribe meet you, they'll be like, Felicity, how's your book coming along? You'll be like, oh
Great.
no,
yeah,
why
that's
did
just
I
what I
mention
need.
this? Oh, amazing. Felicity, thank you so much for coming back on the Tough Girl podcast to share more of your story. But where is the best place for people to go to find out more about you and the incredible expeditions that you do, the speaking, the books, the films, and everything else that you're involved in?
My website, felicityaston.com. That's the best place. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook, so I'm pretty regular there. So yeah, those three means are the best.
Fantastic. Felicity, it's been absolutely amazing learning all about the incredible expedition, from the idea to the training, the physical and the mental, to getting out there and doing it and completing it. Absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for sharing on the Tough Girl podcast.
Thanks very much.
Hey tribe, how you doing? Oh, it was so amazing to catch up with Felicity. What an incredible role model, what an incredible woman. I'm so glad that she's continued to follow her passions and continue to inspire other women to go after their own dreams and ambitions. Like I mentioned at the very start, we have spoken to Felicity before, and in the last podcast episode, which came out in December 2015, Felicity shared more about her incredible journey to be the first woman to ski alone across Antarctica. This was, a journey of 1,744 kilometers. It was over 59 days. During the podcast, we talk more about the planning, the preparation, the logistics involved, as well as the physical preparation and the mental preparation. Felicity shares more about her daily routines while out on the ice and how she dealt with that isolation. Packed full of information and top tips to help you. Now, if you are interested in polar exploration, there is a couple of other episodes that I would recommend that you listen to. Anne Daniels, she's a British record-breaking polar explorer. I love Anne's story because she had no background in polar exploration. She'd gone through a divorce, she'd left her job, she was having triplets, and she decided to follow this passion, and she went on to do incredible challenges. So Anne shares more about her life and the challenges that she's faced and overcome. Most recently, we spoke with Maria Legestam, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, who's a Welsh-British polar adventurer who was the first person to cycle to the South Pole, which is, again, absolutely inspiring story. We've also spoken with Marsha Gordon, who's a mum of two, who became the fastest woman to complete the Explorers Grand Slam Challenge. And the Explorers Grand Slam Challenge is when you climb the highest mountain on every continent and visit both of the poles, so the North and South Pole. So Marsha shares more, again, about her journey. All of this information about the women and about the challenges can be found at toughgirlchallenges.com. That's where you can find the links to the podcast episodes from 2015 all the way up to the current day, as well as more information about myself, the next challenge I'm going to be going on, as well as previous challenges from running the Marathon des Sables to through hiking the Appalachian Trail in 100 days. There's also links to all of the social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, YouTube, etc. So well worth checking out. Finally, a massive thank you to all my incredible patrons who are out there supporting me every single month. Without their support, I could not put the podcast out. I could not do these extra episodes. I could not provide this content for you all. Having a regular source of income and knowing that at the beginning of the month I'm going to have some funds coming in allows me to plan, to prepare, and to also save for my next challenge, as well as to fund the running costs of the podcast and the website. Because like anything, nothing is free. There are costs involved, and I do have bills. I am planning to move out of home, yay, because I am 36 now, and it is time to make that break. So I'll be moving out of home at the end of August once I've handed in my dissertation. So exciting time. So if you want to learn more about becoming a patron, you can get your name onto the Tough Girl website on a dedicated patrons page, and that's for all patrons, $2 and above. Your name goes on the website, but please just go and visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast, and you can sign up at $2, $5, $10. which the reason it's in dollars is because it's an American company, Patreon. But basically, a lot of actually my expenses are actually in dollars, so it works out quite well for me. But if you convert that into sterling, it works out, $2 is something like £1.40, $5 is like £3. And if you think that's as a monthly cost, it's less than 70p per podcast episode. So it's a huge amount of value that you are getting for that contribution, and I really do appreciate it. Tribe, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, have a fantastic day. Get out there, have some fun. I'll be back with you next Tuesday for another episode of the Tough Girl podcast. New episodes come out every Tuesday at 7 a.m. UK time, so make sure you subscribe, tell one friend about the Tough Girl podcast, and have an awesome day. All right, take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.